Welcome everyone. I'm joined today by Mr. Axel Molina, whom I've known since, I think, July 2020, right? When you came and joined the Heidegger course on death. We've been to every single one since, every single course. And earlier this year, there was, I taught a course on early Greek philosophy, what some call the pre-Socratics. And during this time, Axel started writing a piece on and thinking in terms of memory. And I think that's developed since a bit. So what we'll do is we will investigate the phenomenon of human memory and human recollection today. And Axel, maybe you could summarize a bit and also what got us maybe into this conversation tonight. And then we'll see where it goes.
Thank you. Yes. I at some point, I started having to really come to terms with what it meant for things to show themselves as proper things, and for things to be the standard by which we think of reality or what's real. And simply in my phenomenal experience, I had to come to terms with things like the fact that I can see an operatic sunset. And in that, there's a very palpable divinity, even though I myself am not religious. And I had to contend with the fact that when I looked at trees, I could see leaves dancing. How does that make any sense at all if we're not thinking, really in terms of things and what is gathered, in a way that's very different from cutting things into parts that are kind of lifeless. And but at the time, I was still trying to maintain a certain sense of substantiality. And so I was thinking of memories in terms of atoms, sort of spatial temporal atoms.
Yeah.
And I was trying to recover a sense of solidity and precisely a sense of grounding.
Yeah.
And, which reminds me of the conversation that you just had with Thomas about, Aristotle versus Heidegger, where you discussed this danger of the lack of substantiality of nature that we encounter when we try to think pure occurrence. That there's no, sort of interiority to things. There's no hermetically sealed off interiority in things, just as there's no hermetically sealed off interiority in us. And so immediately when I heard that, I thought to myself, well, this is really interesting, and I understand this danger. So I might have said I don't really see the danger, but I know I do see the danger. There is definitely a danger there. And the way that I make sense of it now is that this contradiction, right? This fact that things still, even thinking pure occurrence, that things still retain their substantiality, in a sense. They're intelligible as substantial, but they're intelligible as substantial as memories. So this contradiction between, for example, my non-belief in God and the divinity of the sunset, or my seeing something as dancing and insubstantial. This sort of contradiction is sublated into a remembering from within the realm of Beingness, so that things are gathered as memories.
Yeah.
So there is a certain borrowing of the substantiality of nature from other epochs.
Yeah. So I mean, something that I didn't get into with Thomas so much, because I wanted to give him eine Gelegenheit, which is such a much more beautiful word than opportunity, eine Gelegenheit. So a laying open, you could say, an opening to present his reading of Aristotle, which is full of spark and fire, right? Which seldom happen. But and something that we do get into though is this danger of just say, oh, let's just become neo-Aristotelians and almost and he said, no, it's not copy paste, but the question is, what does substance even mean to us, right? And why is it that the Aristotelian translation is of ousia, which is presence, or homestead, Anwesen, a way of being present or abiding, is translated as substare, something that substance and subsists in this manner. And also post Kant, this is also what we need to realize is, and that this ties in with when I said to you, I think towards the end of the German idealism course, which came after the early Greek course, I said to you, why don't you continue with the memory project and write something new? I remember you saying, no, I now think it's reification. And this is something that, and to some degree, we need to, let's say, objectify and reify sometimes. But so when we just say everything's made up of memory particles, then we are in the realm of imagination and in the realm of reification. And then and the same can happen in philosophy. And so post Kant, this is not to be scholarly, but what philosophy begins to see is that, and Kant begins to see very, very definitively, is that we become purely dogmatic metaphysicians that basically just imagine a world, if you want to put it simply, like Leibniz's monadology, which doesn't hold up with experience. And this becomes ever more crucial to be able to think in actu, to speak in Latin. So to be able to think, I don't like the word performatively, but let's say in acting itself out, in the activity itself, which isn't too far from maybe even Aristotle and his struggling with time and the question of presence, parousia, in his text on memory. And what you also mentioned was the Beingness, and I think we can let the rabbit out of the magic hat, which is to say that what I think usually Beingness in Heidegger is translated as the event, right? This is the standard translation. Now, there's something what he's talking about is that something's happening. There's an eventuating, the event of appropriation, and he does say in the thought that there is appropriation. The French word appropriation would be a better word. So Aneignung for Ereignis also, but there are passages, and he doesn't fully, I think, himself really say this, but he does say in the Freiburg talks that the Ereignis is, in a weird way, not much to do with any event in any ordinary sense, but is at the very cusp or edge of what metaphysics can say or think, or where all of this has led. Let's just put it like this. It's coming to gather itself completely and entirely. And only then, so Ereignis is the realm where everything that has ever in any way happened or occurred is now gathered and bubbling up. And in a weird way, that the digital or the databases of the digital age make this available also, right? And so you get to people who say that all we can do now is curate the past and manage the past and the particles of the past. But with Heidegger, I think we find a more profound sense where we don't become curators of particles of the past, of memory particles, but there can be a flourishing or a living of memory, a recollection then in a full sense.
Yeah, and ultimately, I mean, it does still sort of feel like a bit of a waiting room, in a way.
Yeah,
a waiting room for a new epoch.
Yes,
but I feel like there's the recognition that we have to let a new question of being articulate itself. It's not up to us. We can't do it, and it's something that is unimaginable to us. So I don't know what to do other than not curate, but
Well, okay, but you said it's unimaginable, so let's take this seriously. Why is it not no longer in the realm of the imagination? Because the imagination, I would say, is where people like Francis Fukuyama end up, who proclaim the end of history. They can't. Imagination can only deal with either what is present and what it can represent, or with concrete images, and then of course it can go to fantasy, right? I mean, you can think about why certain fantasy novels were so so prevalent and made so prominent over the past decades. I'm not going to mention any names, but that's all part of the imagination, mashing together images. And at this point, the images are mashed together so rapidly and almost so senseless, so in such a mania that they become senseless. So, the weird thing about fantasy is that it has to actually follow very strict rules, because if it doesn't, it becomes completely, it actually has to be grounded in actuality. If it's not, then it just, myths make sense because they make sense. The gods are bound up by necessity also in Greek mythology. At this point, not much makes sense anymore, because all the imagination has left is rehashing and mashing together images, and like this, with the end result being, you could say, madness, Wahnsinn, Sinnlosigkeit. But why? So maybe we'll follow this. Why is it unimaginable? That we are in a waiting room, you said, and to overcome, to get over, to overturn, etc. Why is that unimaginable? What do you think?
Well, I think the question itself, it's hard for me to articulate this, but
as it
the question itself is the self-differentiation of being, right? Like, it is that radical incision of the self-differentiation of being, and so it's well, for one thing, I mean, we're thinking being as a Ragness. So what room is there for a question there, right? I don't know what room there's for a question for us to pose, because we're thinking in terms of withdrawal in itself, and so the withdrawal sort of in a way consumes all questions that we can pose, because it's a question about what, what is it that we have to ask anymore? So, this is what I don't have a question to ask, because withdrawal in itself leaves me with nothing. And so I have no idea what kind of question can arise from that. But it seems, if my understanding, or what I see as the self-differentiation of being, is this, well, the concealment of being's withdrawal. But the withdrawal is so explicit in Ariagness, that the concealment of withdrawal isn't occurring, and until it occurs, and it occurs precisely as the question, what is being, then, but I have absolutely no access to that at all.
Okay, so, but still, it says something. Let's say something that is, in a peculiar way, an attempt at articulating where we are. You said, waiting room. Nietzsche speaks, as you remember, speaks of the arrow and the bow and the great tension, and the need for great tension in spirit. And Rilke, probably taking this also from Nietzsche, also speaks of the necessity of the bow flying. Heidegger sees the entire period after Hegel as only a transition, if you like, to the other beginning. So I mean, if this, you don't have to go into to the concealment of withdrawal again, but to stay with memory. Why? I mean, so the question we have to ask is, why is it that some are addressed by this, and begin to see? Because what I think ultimately the entire thinking path is after is bringing back in a way that's never been done. I mean, so also the fact that philosophy itself becomes, explicitly or aware of its own trajectory, with Hegel especially, and even more so than with Heidegger. So in a way, a retelling or a recollecting, which for to mention this, which for Aristotle means that there is a syllogism. Now we can understand this logically, but I know it's a sylogos. So it's a concentration and gathering, and not just a pure memory, an animal kind of memory also, but that can just be reactive. But the syllogism is active. So recollection is an active mode of being, of the soul for Aristotle, of course. But so why? So you can respond in any way you want, but in which way then still does it speak to you? Even if then there is a moment where there is a breakdown, and then you could ask yourself, of course, well, why is there a breakdown?
Yeah, you're right. It does speak. I mean, the movement toward intelligibility is still there's still a recognition. There's a recognition and a cherishing of things in their truth, right? Their truth as in their ownness.
Yeah,
and so there's a cherishing of that, and then the way of response that comes from that. I was thinking of this one in this remembering, or in this appreciating things as gatherings of memories and things. So things remain intelligible to us, even though we're, I don't know, outside of the epoch, but they're intelligible to us.
Yeah.
In the dimension of their freedom. And so because of that, in a state, in a way, we're always in a state of fallen in the Heideggerian sense, but it's sort of like an upward facing fallenness, in which we're facing openness, and freedom.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, go on.
Which to me points to, something, maybe if we think about what's at the root of maybe the turning of thought, or what is it that drives thought in the first place within, let's say, within us to go into these purely ontic rabbit holes versus being open to possibilities? What is it where does that come from? And it's, for me, it's a disposition that's really heartfelt, and this is where I think that maybe we should start to really think about, like, we're going to sound very new agey, but as sort of desubjectivize the openness of our own heart as being something that isn't a property of the subject, but it's actually part of the movement of being.
And but so if you want to go on, but this openness is an openness that's shared. The dimensionality of the human being is not, so it's not a bag of soul of the soul that contains faculties and capacities, etc. But we are multidimensional beings that are addressed and touched by a multiplicity of dimensions, which we at the same time also are, and participate in also. And there's something else that, so we do need to continue along the line of the question of the dimension of freedom. And also, and this is something, that seems to be so so ordinary that, oh yeah, of course, we can remember, we can, Plato talks about anamnesis, blah blah blah, and we can talk about all this conceptual stuff and what does he mean by this, but why can we read Homer? Why can we read the Bible? Why can we read Gilgamesh, if you like, where it gets already a bit strange for us? But why is there a way in which that we understand Plato, or Aristotle, or Heraclitus, or Aquinas, or even bloody Leibniz? Uh, So how is it? Let's to make this a bit clearer. Maybe what I'm trying to say, to speak in a historicizing way, I would say, how can we understand texts from different epochs? But this is not what I mean. There's something, I think, not underlying, but there's something that keeps speaking itself throughout, so that we can at all form any relationship with what has been. So I say this on purpose, has been thought, or maybe even has been thinking itself. By the way, as you are, when we read Hegel, as you know from Philip, there's, when we read the beginning of the Logic, and when we were in the seminar with Philip, and Philip said, no, just stay on being, and then we go to nothing. We don't know anything yet. We know it's cheap to say, well, we know it'll be the idea. No, I mean, if you know the idea is going to come, all you need to do is read Wikipedia. I mean, this is the waiting room, right? In the waiting room, you just read the summaries of everyone, every big thinker, every big epic. You don't need to travel the hero's journey. Why read the Odyssey? Because he's going to return home anyways. But that's not the issue. Is not that he returns home. The issue is how he returns home, and why he leaves home. Now, why do you go out in order to return home? Well, why do you go out? If you just stay in the waiting room, no. So there would be no need to read it if on the one hand there wouldn't be something that's, say, activated or energized by reading it, which is grander than us, and at the same time we wouldn't be able to read anything of the so-called past if there weren't that which is active throughout. You see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. The fact that there's something still active,
yeah,
right, means that we're not in the final destination. Would that be more or less? Would that follow from what you're saying? Yeah. I get the sense that perhaps the articulation of the question, of being, the question itself, perhaps it always has a sort. It's just the beginning of the articulation, the clarity of the question itself, comes about simultaneously with whatever answer we start to give it, or the way in which we try to understand it.
Yeah.
Right. And I guess maybe that's where we are. We're trying to understand or be at the point of the birth of the question itself, and why that's important to us, I guess, is difficult to see. And I don't know. The issue is that it's especially difficult because, again, it's easy to go into fantasy. It's easy to jump to mysticism and or the occult.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it is interesting that there is something about this concern which seems to be always associated with a sense of a view toward the divine, for some reason. Well, at least for me. And I don't know. There seems to be something calling. There's something beautiful about it, and
Yeah.
But I can't. I have no idea why.
Well, maybe we don't need to know why, right? That's maybe not. Maybe perhaps it's simply the draw that which draws whatever that which is that draws us in, draws in, and once that's been opened up, I mean, we can have these exercises of trying to be silent, and you mentioned I'm finding myself being close to feeling I'm lying or so to myself or to others, trying to articulate it. But that in itself, what this could indicate is that articulation, it doesn't fail. Right? It's not all occult or so, but that the inherent difficulty will be to be able to articulate concealment, withdrawal in such a way that it doesn't collapse and become explicit itself again. Just like so in the first instant, when we begin to see something, we do reify it, often intend to do so, or objectify. But then the next step perhaps often must be to be able to articulate how everything is made up of, or built out of, or can be built out of memory. Right. So let's say this: why is it that some say we're now just curators of times past or so, of everything becoming a museum? But that in itself indicates that there's something else going on, which even opens that possibility in the first place. So you must have at least some remote relationship or connection with something very foreign, even just in terms of, in a very simple way, of a temporal distance to you. But at the same time, what is so, to speak with Spengler, what is a portrait by Rembrandt? To Spengler, that's history. That's genuine, and it's living history. It's burned into this one portrait of him. Let's say one of the later portraits, especially. And so, but what is it, as it were, that lets us be connected to it? And also, why is it that throughout the eons there are echoes of? And of course, we have, say, eyewitness reports from Parmenides. But that's, by the way, where the word historia, where you get the English word story and history from historein, which means to be an eyewitness in Greek. So let's say Parmenides is an eyewitness of being, and Heraclitus is an eyewitness of logos. And we have these eyewitness reports, and these eyewitness reports, they keep echoing. And at some point, sometimes they begin to speak to someone. The question here, of course, can be why, can be how, but even just, I think we very often just all too quickly just take it for granted that we can at all read anything that is not of our particular 50, 60 years that we are granted on this earth. That's, and I think this is what you saw there in the beginning of this year. It's because I remember you saying when we came into German idealism, you said, well, it's all coming back now from the early Greeks. It was so building up on it. And at the same time, so sorry, I'll let you speak now.
Yeah, there's a memory. I think of it as a bridge precisely between times, between epochs, and maybe thinking about it a little bit structural in terms of aesthetic temporality. Structure. It's it seems to me that there's a sort of, we call it like a ecstatic synchronization, if you will, where the possibilities of the past, of other times, are then projected into our futurity for all things. And for me, it's very interesting. The historical artifact for me is something that's incredibly interesting for that reason. That we can hold up a historical artifact and it has a meaning that's derived from a future that is part of another time. Yet still, it's intelligible to us as that. And so the what is to come isn't just sort of what's it's what's promised and may never come to be, but it's also what was promised and never came to be.
Yeah. Yes.
So our horizon is actually from where if we're in Beingness, our horizon is the horizon of all times, right? But still limited by our own particular death. Still limited by. So we're still mortal. It's not like we can access every other epoch, but certainly, and I just one quick thing that I want to say before I forget, that I thought was interesting in listening to Ivo de Janeiro. He was talking about how we can't just get rid of the metaphysical way of understanding things and the metaphysical ground, because everything is made of that way of thinking. And what's interesting about gatherings of memories is that it's not particularly in conflict with a purely ontic, or let's say scientific way of understanding things. I probably, if you were to tell a neuroscientist that you think that in your phenomenal experience things are made of memories, they'd probably say, yeah, we know that, right? Or if you were to ask an evolutionary biologist something like, if you were to say, well, I'm afraid of snakes because a lot of people before me had encounters with snakes. So, I think that, I don't know what that says, but I think it's fascinating that there seems to be, we're at this place where we're simultaneously can connect these two ways of looking at things. But it's like, so it's this, it's heterological in a sense, but it's not as if this is inherently, it's not mutually exclusive.
And it's been in the air for quite some time. Let's say Spengler says that the last grand project that the Faustian man still has to fulfill is to write the history of the future, is to write the philosophy of the future, and to categorize everything, every single epoch of the past also. And Aristotle, of course, says this: it's impossible to remember the future. Okay. But he says in the versions today, this is in brackets, I don't know why. There were no brackets in ancient Greek. But it says that there can be an episteme, there can be, we would translate a knowledge or a certain science, a certain way of making knowledge, producing knowledge of that which is to come, of ton melon, which is what is willed, you could almost say, into the future. This is a bit of a stretch on the Aristotelian Greek, but so Aristotle begins to see this, I think, but at the same time, what Dilthey talks about, and Dilthey and Count York, they speak of history as a virtual realm from which we can find inspiration, say that's more York, I think, than Dilthey. Already, Hegel speaks of virtuelle Möglichkeit, virtual possibilities. This is in the 1830s, this is in the Encyclopedia. When it comes, and he does so in connection to memory or to remembering, Erinnerung, innering, you could say in English maybe. So, and the other thing that I want to say, because you said, it seems obvious here and there for the neurologists, etc. Whenever something seems all too obvious, there's something, let's say, that's also there that is not about making it explicit necessarily, but this proclaimed obviousness might be itself then the what's, I don't know how to put it, maybe what's driving this time, or what's at stake in it. If it's all too obvious, why is it that we don't just have access in libraries to most of what's ever been written. There's a simultaneous synchronistic access to everything that's ever been produced in any meaningful, that let's say that can form part of the catalog, that it ends up on the internet immediately, and it ends up, that means not on the internet but in a database, and it takes on, like this dialogue will do, it becomes, this is television, but it becomes digitized when it's on the platforms, and then it becomes part of a database. If it's on YouTube, it's in a search database, and as such, it's already in. It takes on a life of its own. It's something of the past that then unfolds in tidal waves into the future. And then something else you said, and this is very important. I pulled up a quote, which is why it's going to be a bit bright now. Do you remember this from when we read Nietzsche together? And this is from Zarathustra. And even what you abstain from weaves at the web of all future humanity. Even your nothing is a spider web, and a spider that lives over the blood of the future.
You mentioned that the internet isn't something that belongs to the realm of Gestalt. It is. It does. Yeah. It seems it is sending things off into the future. I mean, it is acting as a tool for for remembering.
And well, yeah, go on. Yeah,
I mean, people finding Halcyon.
How? I mean, how did you end up here?
It was very kind of in a way not entirely random, but without the internet it wouldn't have been possible.
but so we don't have to get into Gestalt and how we understand Gestalt, because Gestalt is at once also just a photographic negative, and the photographic negative means, as this is Heidegger who says it's a photographic negative, and I think he says it in Le Thor in France in the 60s or 70s. So this is after decades of Heidegger thinking about technology, and of course at the same time thinking about the destruction it can bring. But a photographic negative is what you need I think if I understand, analog photography correctly, is what you need in the step to producing the final image. Of course, it's an analogy, and we can problematize it by saying, but isn't Heidegger against images? No, I mean, ultimately he's not against anything. It's about trying to understand what is, and what Gestell. If it is a photographic negative, then it is a copy of something that's there, but it can, of course, be used to produce an image that can be imprinted. And images and memory go together, right? I mean, there's no memory without image. Of course, if images become too prevalent, then memory is messed up again also, and that's something to consider when we try to, then this is not something you can really do in a free flow freestyle dialogue. This is what requires the genuine work, to bringing together and distinguishing images, memory, recollection, etc. But if it is a photographic negative, then it can lead to an image, and an image can become alive. And of course, an image can also itself become a shadow image again. But it is, in Plato's cave, the shadows are not real or so. That's not the point. The shadows are eidolon. They're shadowy images. They are formlets, you could say. The eidolon indicates that they are, derivative of the eidos, yes, but they very much, let's just put it like this, they structure the world. There is no cave without the images. It's genuine to the people who see it, and there is no freedom outside the cave. The freedom occurs in the moment of seeing the shadows as shadows in returning. And when, of course, there are, any say technology can become enslaving, and this, especially with the so-called digital. I don't even know that, when we say digital, I think there are, because the question is this digital or is this actually just television? So this medium, for example, right? It's not necessarily digital. It becomes digital because it ends up on a database. That's how it becomes digital. The medium itself is television, but the medium itself is not. So we're not having a blueprint or so that we're trying to use and to create something, but it translates into, by sending these shock waves through the network. It can generate a way of a way of seeing the world through that it's outside of the scope only of Gestell. So in a weird way, you could say it actually requires, Agnes needs Gestell to flush all of this up, and then our response must be, that's where the work begins, right? Is to be human again, and that means to be able to understand memory.
I really, I feel like there's in a way, Gestell holds a Reichnis as death holds us. That's what I see. So it's this, right? It's the withdrawal of sense which brings it to the fore, in the same way that the negation of the ineffable full dimensionality of our being becomes clear to us through our complete annihilation. And so it's, yeah, they're sort of inseparable. I can see this this bubbling up, resting on.
And this is very dangerous, right? Because it means that something very archaic is all of this. It can erupt. Something utterly unmodern. I mean, so something I've said before this is something that came out of our seminar also on Heraclitus especially. The question of hen kai pan, one and many, and how many in one can be articulated in thought without, remember what we talked about. Empedocles tries to imagine how the four different so-called elements, at least it's how Aristotle relates the story, can be brought together into one. And as Hegel points out, the imagination is at a fault. The imagination cannot articulate this, because if you have on the one hand distinguished elements that are perfectly, it's an element, so that means it has a physis of its own, and fire is just fire. It's not also water. But the imagination then has to make this claim, which it cannot articulate. The question is, though, in which way this can be articulated. Say, for Hegel would be logically, for Heidegger would be seinsgeschichtlich and temporally, in terms of ecstatic temporality. Just a hint, for anyone who's listening, that why does Heidegger have to think time? There it is. And the one and the many, if you, the one world fantasy, imagine there's no, whatever Lenin sang, well, that's an imagination. And it fails because it cannot allow for a oneness where there is still a manifold within it. It just mashes everything together and tries to technocratically generate a homogeneity that then, actuality will actually just not even accept. You can try, but it can't be done. It'll be so destructive, nothing will stand in the end. But at the same time, it has led to, say, the Earth becoming a planet, becoming interconnected, simultaneous through the internet to a certain degree. But it actually shows more of a multiplicity, and can bring together. But at the same time, what this will be the difficult philosophical task going forward, is to be able to articulate the one and the many in a way that is, let's say, outside a Eurocentric / technocratic response to because it is a response, right? They are this is a response. The technocratic response is a way of responding to a certain challenge that all of a sudden is there, and is inevitably there when you read, the white papers of the past 150 years. But it's an accelerating race against no one knows against what. And it's an arms race, right? It's ultimately an arms race of who has the better computers and the bigger databases and can pull out anything quicker than the other, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that in itself is completely deflationary and self-defeating ultimately, because it will always just gasp behind, as all of empiricism always just gasp behind data, more data and more data, and it'll lead to heart attacks. but yeah, I'll leave it at that. I would have made any sense.
Yeah, it does. The archaic the archaic within technology. It's hard to differentiate. I mean, are we dealing with Earth here, right? I mean, is technology kind of an earthquake? Is it a kind of earthquake that destroys a way of thinking, very, very dramatically?
Or not
destroying people's
or not, but
or not.
No. Yeah, no, because if so, the question is always, where's the great exit? Where's the great escape route? It's the way out of the cave is back into the cave. The way into freedom is out and back again. Is the Master Eckhart? Why do you go out? In order to return home. And of course, you can ask questions whether there can be something like a home in a completely technocratically, let's say, controlled world. But if anything, if we accept withdrawal and concealment, then something like this isn't possible. It's in a matter of fact is Gestell sort of lies to itself and conceals to itself that there is concealment. So it's blind to it's blind to the colors of the world, to put it like this. And it can never see them. There's no colors. It's just a photographic negative. It's necessary, but it isn't the world. It wants to be the world, which is also why it's angry when you say it's not. But yeah, and so go on.
No, yeah, it's tricky to not go to war with it, because it does seem to go against this activity or this openness. And I'm, as you know, I'm sort of heavily influenced by maybe Buddhist thought. And something comes to mind, which is, I think, O.G. Rose was talking about with Daniel Saruba about religion. And O.G. said that religion really is our attitude toward absence. I think Nishitani says that religion is how we relate to absolute nothing. And I think maybe it's worth considering that the asking the question of being is itself the first reification, or is born out of sort of first reification. So it's maybe similar to, or like Nietzsche's great lie. But as I was saying, when I was like, this whole speaking silence, like if we really think withdrawal fully, then it's not a lie, as there's no mismatch between substances. So instead of being a reification in a negative way, it is simply an articulation of being as a self-differentiation, which is devoid of, which is not a negative thing. So this is how I wrap my head around Gestell and see it as something to not be at war with. But still something to fear, because it does threaten our homes. And the other thing is, our search for substantiality is it just the reliability? Do we just want reliability, right? Is it just a way? Is it just we just want the reliability that we need, or that in order to build homes, right? So that we can just withstand things in their as they are.
Yeah, but no, but so what, you know, in a weird way, what Gestell is trying to do, I think, is to instantiate where the thought has already died, with the originality. I mean, not originality in this ridiculous academic sense, but you know, the origin is gone. We're cut off from it, and Gestell tries to have substance by securing beings in their beingness. So securing, you know, beings as livestock, beings in their genetic makeup, or you know, then this can go in all kinds of weird directions, as you know, and also weird abstractions, right? So the planet has an ideal equilibrium state, which it supposedly always has had, but there's this entire planet can be measured. You know, we can weigh the planet, apparently. I don't know on what scale we do this, but we do, and that's something in us. So, right, I mean, there is something in the human being. When you read Cicero, there are no texts by Cicero. He speaks about flying to the moon, basically. And you read Heidegger on ideas for a philosophy of the history of human beings. Right on the second page, on the origin of the Earth, he says that only once we have flown to Mars and the moon will we be able to know our own planet better, and also be able to foresee our future. This is what, 200, probably 170 years, I don't know, 200 years before, almost 200 years before the first flights to the moon. And before that, I think, so the securing of Gestell, or the attempt to secure of speaking then this beings in their beingness, which I think beingness is often misunderstood, because beingness in the strict sense, it does not mean, you know, more being or better being. It means Seienheit. So let's say a generalization of what beings are. For example, the genetic code, DNA, is beingness. It is, by the way, is a product of the imagination, which is why you have these weird spirals, and you can image and map it all perfectly, and then you can cut it and everything else according to that very imaging. So it does get at the actual, but it is actually, it's a reified reality. It's a thingliness and not a living, active actuality. That so what Gestell in a weird way tries to do is to give substance. At the same time, the human being always needs to ground. So there is a need for grounding. It isn't just utter chaos, abyss, or anything like this either. So in Gestell, or you know, what is grounding? Grounding is, for example, can be thesis or hypothesis, to give a foundation. But of course, this can go horribly wrong, not in a moral sense, but in an ontological sense, and can become extremely destructive. And so, but then that this is always then when the human being is then again addressed, to speak with Ezra Pound, to be men, not destroyers. And going to war against Gestell would be, of course, with the means of Gestell, to go war against it. And that would, so it would be full-blown Gestell, right? We would, this is exactly what all of this talk about the war to end all wars was about. This is what this showed. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, hopefully it's not inevitable, and hopefully that's not, what it takes for a new question of being to arise. That would be, I think that would be Spengler's position, perhaps, right? Sort of a civilizational complete collapse, right? Either that or ossification, and then, I don't know. I know you're not particularly sympathetic to that sort of cyclical view. But I do.
You know why? Because it's again of the imagination. It's so everyone should. I think everyone should read, and he's right here. Both volumes. This is one of the great works of one of the last great German humanists. There's no one, certainly not me, who is on the level of the Bildung, of the formation and knowledge of this man around anymore. Who could even come to this conclusion? That's not, we've got cycles. He doesn't say there are cycles and everything. He gets into something, some of the weirdest things is that he speaks of Gleichzeitigkeit. He speaks of simultaneity. Now, and so this is where it gets, so in the weird way of thinking, it is really simultaneous, but he's not yet going there. Do you see what I mean? So he speaks of the simultaneity of certain phenomena or occurrences, but they are, because he looks at them as a historiographer, they are only simultaneous in the sense of, say, a similarity between them, or leading to a similar outcome or so. But in let's go full in the weird unfolding of thinking. No, they are simultaneous. It's simultaneous. So right now, Thucydides is an eyewitness, a historia of the Peloponnesian War, which is in still sending shockwaves, and all of what we don't even know occurred, etc., also sends shockwaves. And of course, and that's the worst part of all, as also Nietzsche says, remember from the Zarathustra, thoughts that come on doves' feet guide the world. It's thoughts that guide the world on doves' feet. So it's not about, I'm for or against the cyclical view of history. I think it has, in a way of thinking, it has certain limitations. Those limitations are at the same time what makes Spengler very rich. For anyone, it's one of the great works of memory ever. That's what it is, right? It's one of the great works of recollection, and he gets at something very, crucially important about where he already sees the end of history. Also, why is this end point coming? And this, Paul Natorp speaks of the 0 point. As you know, Hegel mentions the end of history, and this becoming revealed of entire histories can, of course, be seen as an indicator for the eschaton, because history will only be revealed in the apocalypse. So when it is sort of when something really comes into its end, that's when you begin to see it. So I think that there is something there that's beyond just a scholarly debate between, is it linear, is it cyclical, or anything like this, which is itself the question: is this in a strange way an end time? And what and which doesn't mean that everything just ends, but in you said the waiting room, and what will it reveal? What is there to come? Yeah, well, go on.
Yeah. What his history is, it certainly isn't, it's not the interwovenness and fluidity of the science Geschichte. But I think that he does put his finger on something which now I understand in terms of, again, Evil Dictionado's way of describing the task of philosophy as maintaining the ontological difference. Just I think that the way that Spengler sees things, although he doesn't explicitly say it in these terms, I think, is that it's, the cycles occur, as a ongoing and necessary collapse of the ontological difference. So the ontological difference is itself the question, what is being, which self arises. And then from there, in the process of making the openness or absence present, then everything becomes contingency until it's destroyed. But whether or not, there are cycles, I mean, I do see this operating in this interwoven fashion, but much more in this, as you say, the tides and sendings, and not just something that we can simply, clearly cut out as very specific understandings of being that then govern everything in a very neat way.
Yeah, but yes, but also that this weirdness is becoming necessary, right? To say anything, or even, and also, by the way, just this is a side point, but maybe I don't know, maybe it isn't, maybe it is. I mean, have you, when you read Plato, there's the textbook Plato, and then there's Plato. It's there's
just become aware of this.
No, when you read the Timaeus, for example, it's insane what he has to say about the eye. That the eye, for its concaveness, is the mediator, the connector between the inner and the outer fire. Or the poem by Parmenides, this going up to the heavens, standing there at the gates of night and day where they meet. Let's take this seriously, right? That's or the myth of the cave. Why the cave? Why the shadows? Why do we live in an age where this begins to speak to us? And there are ways of operating against this way of thinking, and those are found mostly in the university, where the cave myth, if it's at all mentioned, will just be pedagogical. We just want to teach how to make sense of the theory of forms, which doesn't exist, or it's so strange to see that in philosophy departments it's all about containing. It's just, don't worry. When Heidegger talks about time, it's really just about how you temporally experience time. The weirdest sections of being and time are on ecstatic temporality and historicity, Geschichtlichkeit. They're never mentioned. Who talks about these? No one. This is how Leo ended up in our circles, because no one talks about ecstatic temporality. Why not? So this containment, but at the same time, you could say this is no longer possible because we can now send the shockwaves through the ether ourselves.
Yep, exactly. Yep. I was certainly happy to discover that there's more to Heidegger than hammers.
Oh well. Oh come on. I mean, there's more to Heidegger than Heidegger knew there was to Heidegger. I mean, he does. At the end, he just you can see that he's frantically writing. He doesn't know anymore. He doesn't. He's too old, and then it's coming all of a sudden. But of course, we want to. But no, we can effectively explain everything away, and everything makes sense now within the usual frameworks that we have. No, this nothing will disclose itself. When you read something as it's simultaneous. Oh, just take it literally. Just take everything literally. Just for once, and try and see where this actually leads you. And also that there are when we say, oh, it's a paradigm shift. Well, if the paradigma shifts or changes, that means that the very foundation of everything, of what this with Plato might be a simulation of, has disappeared and reorganized. The paradigma is the image, the primordial image, according to which the icon, the image which is this world, is. Yeah. And that has to do, by the way, also with memory. Well, we don't have to get into this now, but yeah, there's more to Heidegger than Hammers. That's true. There's more to Hegel than spirit and misunderstood dialectics. Hegel, as you know, sees that that metaphysics is collapsing. That it no longer speaks to us. The question whether the soul exists or whether God exists, none of this makes sense anymore.
I get the sense that when you talk about Hegel's logic as being a remembering of the history of thought, and it seems like of course, I haven't finished the course, I haven't read enough, but I get the sense that he is also maybe sort of in this waiting room, and that he is, he's remembering how it is that he got there, but he's in this state of openness. He saw.
Sorry, go on. Yeah.
It's the absolute idea is radically open. Right? He's trying to rescue. Maybe he's or trying to carve out a path from within the limits of that thinking, but and it's time. It's hard. Like, it was really hard for me to follow, because as soon as for me, as the logic, because as soon as nothing withdraws into itself, because for just thinking in Heideggerian terms, for me, I automatically get time and being in the world. So then to go back to going through those motions, it's very difficult, right? To stick to the immediacy of that particular way of thinking. But I do see. I mean, it's almost as if time is still operating there. The moments of sublation are ecstasies themselves, right? So even though time is kind of negated, it's still operating. There's a sense of it operating in the logic and moving it forward.
Time, so not yet differently understood than time has ever been understood, and also Hegel is well. He says in the Phenomenology of Spirit, in the preface to it, he writes of. I mean, first of all, so his bursting onto the scene is with his so-called comparison between the difference between Fichte and Schelling. Now, this sounds like a very scholarly article. He says this and he says this, and but he speaks here of Diremption, Entzweiung. So an unfolding, a developing that leads to a twofold within spirit, within and out of spirit. And that is paradigmatically exemplified and articulated in the two figures of Fichte and Schelling. So far from being just a scholarly comparative study, you can already see why Hegel will become Hegel, because of his capacity and ability to see the let's say, history unfolding. And at the same time, not at the same time, when you get to the phenomenology of spirit, the preface that I mentioned before and didn't finish on, he speaks of a new time that's coming, or a new age, which is announcing itself. And it's announcing itself to us through the silliness and the boredom which we now experience and we can see everywhere. So far from, believing that this is, we're marching just to ever greater freedom, etc., all this, no, I think Hegel is, he wants to give an encyclical way of inscribing, give a foundational categorization to the sciences. Yes, a similar project, by the way, by Heidegger in Being and Time, with fundamental ontology. But he does see in his moments that there is something weird, let's say, already on the horizon. And silliness and boredom. That's you can't build a civilization, or you can't sustain a culture, or even a civilization, which is lower, as you know, for Spengler, than a culture with silliness and boredom. So he is aware, I think, very much of the task of spirit, and at the same time of which is why I think he goes into having to think negativity, and then at the same time incorporating it in the unfolding of the logic history, and that spirit itself is negativity.
Hegel is beyond me.
Do you want to say something?
It's very difficult.
Yeah,
it's
go
very
ahead.
difficult because when you read people like Hegel, well, it really gives you a sense of what we've lost in terms of our ability to think, and even in modern terms of just thinking as computational power.
Yeah.
It's odd how even that was greater. It's remarkable, that even that requires that the computation itself requires sense.
Yeah. Go on. Yeah.
And so you read these passages which are these sentences which I couldn't put together. Who can put together these sentences these days? I feel like a caveman when I read Hegel. It's incredible.
But that must be the task. Is never to reduce anything. But look, this is something I've said to many people. You can optimize on YouTube for the YouTube algorithm, which would be self-defeating, because then I would just be dependent upon an algorithm again, which was the reason why I left academia in the first place. Because, mind you are enslaved by algorithms in academia. Do you know this? Your worth increases by your impact factor, meaning you write gibberish for, I'm just going to be honest, for journals that are ranked highly, and the higher their rank, which is decided by an algorithm, the higher you rank by publishing something in there. And how do you get in? I've been told personally, on the one hand, on the other hand, but also you say nothing over 25 pages, and you make everything very accessible and neatly, don't worry, it's all clear already. And you can explain Heidegger in an hour, blah blah blah, all of this. And I could do this here. I could, we could have 10-minute videos explaining, Nietzsche internal recurrence. That just means, everything you do that just comes kind of back, and so you really have to think about what you do. And you can put this in nice little quotes and put those up on Instagram every single day. Or we sit down and we try to articulate that which is seemingly, for now, not entirely sayable, but already in the air. And in so doing, that's sabotage. It's interruption. It's a way of it's not rebellion. It's not going to war. It's seeing it for what it is, but overturning it from. It's an attempt to overturn from within. And the task must be. We can always say that, look at what all of these what they've been writing, etc., etc. Yes, they've been writing, but we can all sit down, because writing is a craft. And Hegel, by the way, had a very hard time writing. He found it very difficult to write. Not like Schelling. Schelling was a fire spirit. He was just able to write quickly and full of life. And Hegel found it very difficult. But that anecdote aside, writing is a craft, and you get better at every craft by sitting down every day and, in that case, writing. You write every day, and so the aspiration then should be, or the claim should be, that this is still very much possible, and we, at the same time, it's also, we have libraries at our fingertips. We can look up the etymology of every word. Then, of course, the task will be not to be sterile with the dictionaries and everything, but to let it come to life. And that's the difficulty. And it always has been, I think.
So it seems like maybe we have to figure out a way to create the negative image of a museum or something like that, which is the non-museum, the non-history book, and that holds it in the same way that if everything is memories and memories gathered, and so how do we hold this? How do we make a monument to hold, to hold memory? And do we do that by making a non-museum? And what is that?
Well, yeah. So, it's yeah. That's the, well, that's okay. Let's say that's so that's our task. So we know. So we don't forget. But we don't know. I mean, we can't draw up a blueprint now, right? But we can draw from and out of that which has been, to tienenai, that which was being, which, by the way, often, this is Aristotle, which is often translated as formal cause. And then formal cause is understood as blueprint. No, it is that which in memory has been, that is what is called being, and that remains as such, but reoccurs. I think that's already there in Aristotle, even if he doesn't fully develop it. And it's why we can at all relate to. So the English word relate has a double meaning, right? We can relate to something or someone, but we can also relate a story. So I can relate a story to you, or I can relate to you in a certain relationship or so, right? So maybe what you've, and I agree with you what you said, and I will just say that then is the task to build this kind of, let's use this term, a memory palace or a memory cathedral, but one that doesn't become museal nor becomes self-indulgent or narcissistic as it does for the sophists, who use this either to, as Hannibal Lecter does, to his, he built a memory palace for himself.
Oh.
Or the sophists did. The sophists had great memory. They were able to memorize sequences, etc., because that's how they were able to sell their knowledge. So the task then would be to build some sort of a memory cathedral that keeps, I don't know if cathedral is the right word, but that keeps reinvigorating itself, but is never just purely subjective or isolated within oneself. I mean.
It looks beautiful already. I think, to me, I don't know, as I imagine it, and that I think it. Wouldn't it be nice if we did start building temples again, unironically?
Yeah, no, irony is,
as in,
yeah, no, but
I'm completely, as in, we can, even building, even as structures, of course not limited to that, but why not, why not temples to memory?
Yeah, temples. Memory temple. That's yeah. I'll write that down. Memory temples to mnemosiny.